This week, we're taking a look at animation. Now, for animation to occur, you have to have keyframes. Keyframes are telling your file, at this point in time, I want my object to look like this and be at this point on my viewport. Okay, so we're going to have keyframes, and again, this is the same whether you're in Max or Maya. I tried to find a similar rig for Maya, so everything should be even Stevens there. Mainly, we want to think about all of our principles, which I know there are a lot, but if you break it down into little segments, it works out just fine. So, thinking of a ball bounce, that's your kind of number one intro to animation assignment. I think everyone's had to do the ball bounce at least 2 or 3 times to get used to animating before you can jump in with other things. So taking a look at this, you're not going to grab the sphere. No matter, again, what program you're in, you are not going to use the actual sphere. You're going to use the rig, and the rig is set up with controllers. So if you click on these shapes that are around it, you see I can use my move tool to click and drag, and I'm getting a squash and stretch with these ones. The great thing about this rig and the Max rig, when you squash and stretch, the number one thing of importance is that you're not losing mass, right? So if I'm walking down the street and you want to make it seem very cartoony, I can't all of a sudden gain 100 pounds and lose 100 pounds when I go down and back up. I need to keep my main size, but be able to deform with that squash and stretch. Here with this one is how we're going to move it. And then this middle one is also a move. It's if you kind of wanted to deal with parenting. We're not going to worry about that. So just always use the outer one that grabs all the controllers and then your top and bottom rig sections for the squash and stretch. If you're using the rig in Max, you don't have this outer controller, so you've got the squash and stretch on the top and bottom, and then your move with the center controller. Now, something that's a little bit confusing that you'll need to get used to, each controller is going to have their own timeline. So if I start setting keys on this alone, I will not have keys and I will not be looking at the keys for my other controllers. We'll get to it as we kind of move along here. So this is our timeline right here. Currently we have 24 frames, and there's 24 frames generally in a second of animation. You can always right mouse click on your timeline, and you've got some options here. So we have playback speed. We're going to want real time. If you play every frame, it's registering each frame before it plays the next one, and you won't get an actual 24 frames per second. It'll be however the computer kind of loads it up. And then our Playblast down here for when we actually go to render. Down here we've got 24. That's what you can see. We have 24 frames here. So I could type in 120, and now I've expanded the number of frames that I have. So with a ball bounce, you're going to want to kind of figure how high are you going to bounce it, how long do you want it to go in the air, how many bounces is it going to have, etc. So let's zoom out a little. We're going to use our grid as our floor. Sometimes if that's kind of hard for you to see, I just create a plane, drag it on the grid, and now we have a floor plane, because anytime your ball hits the ground, you do not want it to go through the ground. It needs to hit and then squash, and then it's going to stretch and bounce off. It's up to you how you want to make your ball look, if you want it to be kind of sticky or heavy, but I do need to see some exaggeration in there, is one of your principles that we're dealing with. So I've got this here. I'm going to just lock this layer. So create layer from selected, R for reference. Now I can't do anything with it. So I can move my ball up. There we go. All right. So when you think of a ball bounce, again, if you have a tennis ball or something, I would recommend that you actually bounce it or look at some YouTube videos of balls bouncing. But because of gravity, once we hit the ground, we're going to go up in an arc, and as we start to reach the top, it's going to slow down. When it gets to the top, of course, we don't notice it because this is still fast moving, but as it reaches the top, it's going to slow almost to a stop and then increase in speed until it hits the ground again. So we've got kind of a slow in and fast coming out. So when you're dealing with frames, you want to make sure that we're also focusing in on the spacing. So I have an example that I just found on the internet, and you can use just a Google search, but if you look, they'll show you kind of how the frames should be. So again, just Googled animated ball bounce, and you can see. So this is what I'm talking about. The spacing is going to be increased between them because that's what gives it the speed, and then they're going to be closer together and back down. Okay? You can also look up to see some of the timing. You don't necessarily have to follow it, but it's something to look at and pay attention to. Okay? So back into Maya here. I'll just show you kind of the basics of setting up some keyframes. So I'm going to look at my front view. I'm going to start up in the air. So again, you can position this wherever you would like, and then once you have it, I know at frame 1, I want it to be right here in space. I can hit S on the keyboard, and that sets a key. You'll see I've got this red line. Oops, excuse me. All of these have turned red. That means, again, at frame 1, translate, rotate, and scale are all set at these points. So now just for an example on how keys work and how we animate, I can go over to, let's say, frame 10, and I can place my ball on the ground plane. Before I do anything, I'll hit S, because that sets it at that point. So now that I have 2 keyframes here, I can scrub back, and the software does the rest. Now these are called your keyframes. I can still go an in-between. So let's say I go to frame 5, and you'll notice the distance between 2 keys, it always takes the shortest path. So it's not going to do anything crazy, even if I were to go to frame 15 and loop around and go crazy and put it here and then hit S, all it's going to do is a straight line between those points. So then what we can do is go back and in between. So I can go to frame 5, bring it out a little bit, hit S, and now I've got a little bit of a curve to what I'm doing. So again, you want to think about timing and all of that, but get your base keyframes first, then we can go through and add some squash and stretch. So if I know this is where I want it to hit the ground, now is when I can go in and adjust the squash and stretch. But notice, I've clicked on this top one up here, I don't have any keys for this. That's because we haven't animated with this rig controller yet. We only did our main controller. So if I click the main controller, you can see I've got my keys back. So generally what you're going to want to do, just to make sure you don't lose your shape, is to set a key at the beginning of how you want it to be. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So right now, let's say, we can look and see what I have. So I've got that. And if I go to frame 10, I want it to be squashed here. So what I can do, push this down, hit S to set my key, perfect. But now the only issue is, remember I said animation needs 2 keyframes to take place. Currently, it's going to just remain flat the whole time now because I never set any other keys or set it up how I wanted it to start. So what I can do, go to frame 1 and hit S. Then I can go to frame 10, do my squash, and you can make it as extreme as you want. Hit S. Now we've got the transition. Okay? And you'll need to go in the other direction too and add some stretch. So, you know, I don't want this to squash until frame 10, right? It's not going to squash in preparation for hitting the ground. I need it to hit the ground and then squash. So what I really need is to copy this keyframe over to frame 9 and have the squash happen instantaneously. So what I can do is go to frame 1, right mouse click, and go to copy. And then I'll go to frame 9, right mouse click, paste, paste. So now you can see it popped right back up, and now we have full, hits the ground, and plops. Let's say, you know what, I want it to hit the ground first and then do the squash. So I want to move this keyframe that I have at 10. Well, I can hit Shift on my keyboard, I'm holding it down, and I can click and drag around that key. These middle 2 arrows are moving. Now you can see I accidentally got my 1 ahead of that, so you have to be careful. And then I can just move this down. These ones on the outer edge scale. So if I shift and select, I can scale these out to slow down my time, or if I scrunch them together, I can speed up my time. But whenever you do a scale, make sure you right mouse click and go to snap. What happens is when you're scaling keyframes, they're going to be sometimes in between actual frames because it's keeping the distance between them relative to what they were before. And if you have a keyframe that's in between actual frames, we can't grab it. There's no 25.5 frame. So snapping it pushes it to the nearest full number frame. Okay? So while you're animating, you'll generally want to scrub through, but I can move this as fast or as slow as I want. So make sure you're going back to play to see what you have going on. I see that I have moved that way too far. All right, go back to the beginning and play. So you're going to need to go through all this to create the bounce going up and back down. You'll want squash and stretch. So, you know, again, going through here, then maybe you want a little bit of stretch. You can give it a little bit of angle. I'll hit S. I don't have any key to start, so let me undo that here. Hit S to set my key. And then I'll do so we can get that, and then around here. We want it to go back to normal. So if I know that frame 1 is normal, I can always copy that, go to frame 9 or whatever I wanted, and paste that so that it's normal. And then we've got some squash and stretch. Now again, I don't want things to happen in advance, so I need to make sure that it's actually hitting before I have my stretch go away. So it's just some back and forth and seeing what you like and what works best for you. Okay, so maybe here. Now, if I want to go back and ever adjust a frame, so let's say at 10 here, I want to add the squash actually here. If I hit S, and I'm already on a frame that has keys, it will actually just redo it. So let me copy that, paste. I didn't move on to this section yet, so we'll just delete that for right now. So we got the nice squash, hits, and then you would need to go through it again. All right, so then when you're all done with your entire ball bounce, we would do a Playblast. So right mouse clicking in the viewport, clicking the button here. It's going to render from whatever view you're in. If you click on view, so that's our front. I don't necessarily need to show ornaments. That's saying that it's my front view. Can do H264. I want an AVI, display size from window or from render settings. If you want to adjust your render settings, we can go all the way over here into our render settings. It's the fourth clapboard. And if we scroll down, you can see right now I'm 640 by 480. You could do 1280 by 720, whatever you want. You can always click this button here. It's our resolution gate, so that it tells you what you're actually going to see. So you might need to zoom in or zoom out depending upon where your bounce is. I would turn up the quality. These generally aren't the highest quality renders. This is to get like a nice preview and check the timing. So then we can save to file, browse, put it on your desktop, gen bounce test, save, and then just click Playblast. You'll see it kind of goes through it, freezes for a second, and then we have this quick time. Now it's going through my entire timeline as well. But now you can get some of the timing, okay? So animation, a lot of principles, a lot of things to think about, so please don't hesitate. If you want me to go over anything, I'd be happy to do separate videos, or just I can answer you one-on-one. Okay, so I hope you have a good week.